Okay, hello and welcome to today's webinar hosted by Search Laboratory. So the webinar is all about how to implement technical SEO for international markets. My name's Ian Harris. I'm the CEO of Search Laboratory. We started Search Laboratory 11 years ago now, almost to the day, and we were built from the ground up to offer multilingual digital marketing services. So we've helped clients take sites into over 40 countries, 25 languages using our in-house team of mother tongue specialists. We are the laboratory, so we take a very scientific and data-driven approach to everything that we do. And we work with clients such as Hootsuite, Viking, Visa, O2, Ted Baker, and others. Our main speaker today is Jamie White. Jamie is a veteran of 7 years in SEO. Jamie heads up our technical SEO team here at Search Laboratory. He's personally performed technical audits, site migrations, and provided technical SEO recommendations for clients spanning dozens of countries, clients such as GoPro, Boohoo, Karen Millen, Oasis, and many others. And Jamie is now responsible for driving our technical SEO strategy. He manages our team of specialists here, consulting with the management team on our overall SEO strategy. So just a couple of housekeeping points before we start. We will be sharing the presentation at the end so that everyone will get an email. So there's no need to take notes and screenshots and things, so you'll get an email, you can click on that and see a recording of this. And there is a question box on the right hand side, so if you look at your panel there's a chat box. If you type your questions in there, they come directly to us. Jamie is the top man in this area, so please don't go away from this webinar having not asked your question. No question is too daft. Please make the most of it. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Jamie, who is going to take us through the webinar today.
Okay, thank you, Ian, and hello everyone today. So just a quick idea of the agenda and what we'll be running through today. Really, when launching into international markets, it does come with a lot of considerations business-wide, and many of these can drill down to and affect the SEO performance of the website. So they really does need to come with careful consideration and thought. And some of the things that I'll be talking to you about today include site structuring, so the different ways that you can structure and set up your domains and international websites, with some advantages and drawbacks of each of these approaches. Also talking about content structure, so how you might want to target specific pieces of content to specific audiences, and that's where I'll be talking about the hreflang HTML tag, which is a really key piece of code or implementation that you need to take into consideration when launching into international markets. I'll also be discussing Google Search Console setup and how you can utilize Google Search Console to really maximize international coverage of all your international content and websites. And then finally talking about some of the more common mistakes or common pitfalls that we personally at Search Laboratory have seen clients fall into, and some of the prospects that we've been working with, and crucially how you can avoid them going forwards from today. So the first thing I wanted to introduce was the 3 different ways that you might want to structure your website for international coverage. The first approach is ccTLD. Now this stands for country code top level domain, and the examples that I've given in brackets there would quite evident: .co.uk, .fr, .de. This is a country specific domain extension that's very specific, very targeted to that location. The subfolder approach, where everything is hosted on a generic global domain such as .com or .net, .org for example, and then a subfolder or subdirectory structure would be used to host all the international content. The third approach that you could take would be the subdomain approach. Again, everything is hosted on the global top-level domain. In this case, I've used the .com example. but subdomains are used rather than subfolders. So the UK, the FR, the DE comes before the main domain extension. In terms of the pros and cons of these approaches, I will be talking through these in a bit more detail on the following slides. However, we do have a blog post on our website which covers a lot of these in a bit more detail. This will be sent out after the webinar, so you can really digest this and gain a bit more information, a bit more detail than some of the top-level advantages and drawbacks that I'll be running through now. In terms of the ccTLD, Coca-Cola is the brand example that I've used on this slide, so you'll see there UK, Italian and Spanish websites on the right-hand side there. The main advantage of this approach is it's an extremely strong location signal to Google. If you host a .co.uk website, it's very evident that you do want to target people in the United Kingdom, and Google will understand this accordingly and target and rank the content within that local market. There's also a really strong trust factor amongst your audience. For anyone in a local market seeing a domain extension that matches their country of residence, they're perhaps much more likely to click on that listing, so you'll gain a much better click-through rate and engagement on your content from using that unique country code top-level domain approach. In terms of the disadvantages, the main disadvantage of this approach really is the increased linking and promotional efforts that are required to really build up the authority and link equity within each of these domains, because Google will view these as completely separate domains, completely separate websites. There's no immediate sharing of link authority from one to the other. Now this can be addressed with effective internal linking, which I will discuss on one of the later slides. However, in essence, primarily, you will need to increase your efforts amongst all of these websites in order to build up their authority and ranking potential, which does take time and does take an increased cost in terms of resource as well. Also, one of the disadvantages, although not as great, is the purchase cost and maintenance cost of each of these domains. You have to buy each one, renew it every year or every 2 years, and also set up hosting for each of your individual domains as well. So there is a slight increased cost there, although looking at Coca-Cola example, it's probably a drop in the ocean for them. The subfolder approach is one that's taken by Apple, so this is the brand example I've used here. You can see their Australian, French and Brazilian sites all hosted on that generic apple.com global domain. Now the real advantage of this approach is that because everything is stored on one single domain, there's a lot of link authority sharing from that single domain. So all the link equity that's built up within apple.com, taken from any inbound links pointing to any pages on that domain, it's going to be shared across all the other pages within that domain as well. So this is a really good approach to take if you want that immediate short-term gains from a new country or a new language that you're launching into, because setting up a page on a global domain, you'll immediately start to benefit from some of that link equity that's already been built up. One of the other advantages of this approach is, contrary to the previous approach that I discussed, there is a lower purchase and maintenance cost of taking the single domain with subfolder approach. It's one domain, it's one hosting package, it's much easier to set up and maintain over time. In terms of the disadvantages, there is potentially a lower trust factor amongst your audience to taking this approach versus the country code top-level domain approach. One country that I do draw upon frequently is France, and noting that typically you will see a much higher click-through rate on a .fr domain than you will on a /fr subfolder or subdirectory. It's also a much weaker location signal compared to the country code domain approach, because Google views the .com or .net or .org as a global domain. It's not country specific. You do have to undertake a lot more practices within Google Search Console and using your hreflang tags in order to be much more specific and directive with the country that you want this content to be targeted towards. So Google might not necessarily recognize /AU, /FR and /BR as country specific tags. It could be absolutely anything, so you do need to undertake a lot more work to really specify where you want this content to be targeted. Moving on to the third approach, the subdomain approach, very similar to the subfolder approach. However, it's a subdomain, so it comes before the main branded domain as opposed to on the end as a directory. Wikipedia is the example that I've used here on this slide. One of the advantages of this approach, certainly over the subfolder approach, is that you can set up subdomains on different servers, host them in different countries. So you could set up your DE subdomain within Germany and PT in Portugal, for example. That's something that you can't do with the subfolder approach, but it gives you a bit of an advantage, a bit of an edge over that approach there. One of the other benefits is, again, lower purchase and maintenance cost. It's one domain, so you only have to purchase and renew that one domain, and depending on the extent that you take your subdomain setup, you may only have to pay for one hosting provider unless you want to set up different subdomains in different server locations. And one of the other advantages is there is some sharing of the top-level domain link authority. So again, this is definitely not as strong as it would be if you took the subfolder approach. However, it's much stronger than if you were to take the unique domain approach, because Google will recognize that EN, DE, and PT in this example for Wikipedia, they all do reside on that single top-level domain of wikipedia.org. So there will be some sharing of that top-level domain link authority. In terms of the disadvantages, increased promotional linking efforts required, because, as I said, there is only some sharing of that link authority. You still need to put in increased efforts in terms of building up the authority of each of these individual subdomains in order to ensure that they're as powerful as possible to rank within your chosen market. And also, even though you can set up each subdomain on a separate server in a different location, this is still a weaker location signal compared to the ccTLD. It's certainly not as strong as having a .co.uk for United Kingdom and .fr for France. With regards to the subdomain, I always say that this approach sits in the middle of the previous two. It doesn't necessarily have the strong advantages of one or the other, but then again, it doesn't really suffer from any of the serious drawbacks of one or the other as well. Moving on from site structure, I'm just going to talk now a little bit about content structure and how you might structure your content on your international websites. The first approach that you may take is having multiple single language content that targets different locations. So an example here would be 4 pages of English content that target different English-speaking countries. In this example, United Kingdom, Ireland, USA, and Australia. Alternatively, you may have fully translated content that targets completely different languages. So again, 4 pages of content, 1 in English, 1 in French, Italian, and Spanish, and so on. Now, whichever approach is taken here, there might not be enough information within the site setup or within the content itself in order for search engines to understand how they should rank this content accordingly. So we need to give them a bit more information and really push them in the right direction and say that this piece of content is for this language in this country, and so on. And that's where the hreflang code implementation really comes useful. So primarily this was a HTML tag, so a piece of code that would sit in the actual HTML code of the page, and it would always sit within the head section, so right at the top of the page. More recently we have seen this become more commonly implemented within the XML Sitemap. This always was recognized by Google, however it has typically been used by larger, sort of more enterprise scale websites, but we are seeing it a lot more commonly nowadays. What the hreflang code does, it helps Google serve the correct content to users based on their language or their location. So it ensures that your content gets the click-through rate as great as possible, and also engagement rates as strong as possible, like encouraging people to convert through your website because they're landing on the content that's relevant to them. The examples in which this will be used are the 2 that I've just run through previously. So duplicate content with small language variations. Perhaps we've got 4 identical pieces of English content with maybe small changes for currency or even contact information. Google might not see that as unique enough, so it might have difficulty understanding how to rank that content. That's where hreflang would come in handy. And also fully translated content in multiple languages. I'll go into these 2 examples in a bit more detail now so we can really start to visualize how it would become useful. If we've got 4 pages of English content, all targeting different English-speaking countries, in this example I've used our generic widgets page, we have Googlebot in the middle, not necessarily understanding how it should rank all this content. In its mind, it simply sees 4 identical pieces of English content, and what it might end up doing is picking just one of these instances and ranking it all in all markets. And if you're a primarily UK-based company and Google suddenly decides to rank your American content within google.co.uk, that's going to have a serious impact on your click-through rates and the engagement rates of your content. So that's certainly something that we want to avoid. A more severe outcome of this would be if Google simply couldn't decide which of these it should rank, so it decides not to rank any of them and goes with your competitor content instead, in which case your click-through rate and engagement rates are going to be close to zero because your content just isn't showing for the keywords that you want to rank for. So we would use the hreflang code. Now this is an example of 4 lines of hreflang code that would appear within the HTML of an actual page. Now I'll break this down into its individual elements so we can see exactly what's going on with this piece of code. So whenever Google crawls a page and sees this hreflang code, the first piece it's recognizing is we've got alternate versions of this piece of content for different languages. So rel equals alternate, we're saying there are alternate versions of this content. Here we're saying this is where they're located, so we list our 4 URLs. 4 in this case, it could be 2, it could be 10, it could be 100, however many different variants of that piece of content you have. The next piece of the code that we identify within the actual hreflang element is the language. So in this case, we're identifying that they're all in English, which is fine. And then the next piece of code is stating they're specifically for users in this country. So GB, Ireland, Australia, and US. Now Google's understanding after seeing this code, it recognizes that despite the fact that all this content is in English and potentially 100% identical, it recognizes now that it's for users in different countries around the world, so it can serve it accordingly. Now an important thing to note about the code, this is a required tag. So hreflang is primarily a language tag, so you always have to specify the language of that piece of content. In this case it's English, so simply stating that all pieces of content are in English wouldn't really help Google in terms of ranking that content correctly. So we have to use this optional country tag. Now this is only required when all your content or when some of your content is duplicated in terms of the same language. In this case it's necessary. We need to say to Google this content is for users in this specific country. Simply stating that it's in English is not always going to be enough. Moving on to our second example where we have fully translated content in multiple languages. We've got our English version, our French version, our Italian version, and our Spanish version of our content. And we have Googlebot in the middle, not necessarily with enough information to rank this content correctly. Perhaps all this content sits on a generic .com website, so there's not enough of a location signal. Or perhaps we've got multilingual countries such as Switzerland, where languages such as German, French, and Italian are all spoken. Googlebot might not have enough information there to think or to realize which piece of content should be shown for which query. So again, we could use the hreflang tag. Primarily, a lot of this code is very similar. However, the section that's highlighted in red here is what I'm just going to be discussing here. What we're saying in this case is the top one is for English users, the second one is for French users, Spanish users, Italian users, and so on. Now this would apply globally because you'll notice that we've not set the country-specific code here. We're simply saying anyone searching in English, anyone searching in French, Spanish, Italian, etc., anyone around the world will be greeted with this piece of content. So if we pick a French user in France or a French user in Switzerland, they will each be met with that same piece of content. Now this can be really restrictive because you may have specific pieces of content for Switzerland, or it can be really broad and you may not want to target people there. So it does come with a number of considerations. If we were to expand this code out and add the country code, what we're saying here is this is for English users in Britain, French in France, Spanish in Spain, and so on. So we're being a lot more prescriptive with the code that we're using here simply by adding that country element to the hreflang code. We're limiting the French content only to users speaking or searching in French within France. So anyone in Canada, where they speak French, or Switzerland, for example, won't be met with that piece of content because we're telling Google it's primarily for users in France. So again, Google's interpretation after understanding this code is it now knows how to rank each piece of content accordingly. Another element of hreflang would be to use the XDefault tag. Now this really covers any content that's not specific to one particular language. So a couple of good examples where you might use this code is on a country selector page or a catch-all page for any users for whom you don't have a specific piece of content that you want to target towards. an example of a country selector page there, and my piece of hreflang code might look like this. So again, link rel equals alternate, href, and I've specified my URL. In this case, I've simply called the page /world, and hreflang is XDefault. Now Google's interpretation of this code is, okay, this is what I should show to users who don't meet any of the other criteria. So all the previous examples we used where we had a page for English United Kingdom, English US, we also had one for French in France, those are all satisfied by different pieces of content on the website. However, if we pick a user from a country from whom we don't expect a lot of traffic, we might not have a dedicated piece of content for that country, so we'd want to land them on this country selector page and allow them to navigate through the website at their own choosing. The alternate way to implement hreflang, as I mentioned, was to use the XML sitemap. Now this is becoming a lot more popular nowadays. However, typically it would be used for larger, more enterprise scale websites. It's much easier to manage and much easier to maintain over time by seeing this implemented within the XML sitemap. Easier to update and maintain as well. In terms of the implementation, it requires the addition of certain modules or certain additional elements within a standard XML sitemap file. So this is how an XML sitemap file would look. Some of the code at the top simply talks about the language in which we want Google to interpret that code. However, the important element is the middle line opening with LOC, and then we have a URL in there. That's simply stating to search engines, this is the location of one of our URLs. A real-life XML sitemap would contain hundreds, thousands, if not more of URLs, depending on the size of your website. However, this is just a very basic stripped-down version. If we were to expand this code and include hreflang implementation, this is how it would look. Now some of the elements are exactly the same, some of the language that we're speaking in and how we want Google to interpret it, and also the location element. So we're still giving Google the same kind of information that we were with our previous XML sitemap implementation. However, the new section is in here. So XHTML link, these elements are recognized as hreflang. Now a lot of these are very similar to the HTML implementation. Rel equals alternate, hreflang equals, and then the language code, and href equals, and then the URL reference. So a lot of the elements are actually identical. However, the implementation is different. It's included within the XML sitemap file and can sometimes become a lot easier to manage. One important area to note, both within the XML sitemap implementation and also the hreflang implementation, is the self-reference. So in this case, we're referencing the English version within the English version. So Google has a full picture of how that content is structured throughout the entirety of our website. Moving away from hreflang implementation, just touching briefly upon Google Search Console. Previously used to be known as Webmaster Tools. It rebranded about 12 months ago. What we can do within Search Console is set up all our websites, all our international websites as different profiles or properties and target them to users within a specific region if we so desire. This can be done under the Search Traffic International Targeting report and then clicking on the Country tab. You see this option where you can tick this box and pick from that drop-down box where it says United States, pick the country that you want that content to be targeted towards. Any country top-level domains like .co.uk and .fr, it will auto-detect the target country and you won't be able to change this. That's because Google doesn't want to be ranking a UK website in France or the USA, for example. So you can't change the target country if you have a top-level domain for a specific country. However, it can be done at any other level. So domain level, so a generic top-level domain like .com or .net, subdomain level, or even subfolder level. You can be very specific with how you want to target that piece of content to specific users around the world. Now it does come with its sort of considerations. You don't want to select a specific country if that piece of content on your website you're aiming for users around the world. So an example that I would give here is French content that you want to target for users in both France and Canada. You don't want to go into Search Console and tick this box and select France or even Canada, because you're really going to limit your visibility in organic search to that one specific country and not be able to gain traffic from other French-speaking countries around the world. So what we'd always say in this case is tick the box and select unlisted, which is right at the bottom of the list. This keeps it global and it keeps it open. So moving away from the sort of more implementation level, and this is more discussing some of the common mistakes, common pitfalls that we've seen some of our clients fall into in terms of launching internationally. The first one would be not implementing hreflang at page level. It needs to be a page level code if there are alternate versions of that specific page available. So this is the code that we would see on our home page, on all our websites. We've got our hreflang references. And this is the code that we would see on our page1.html, for want of a better example. So you'll notice that the href reference right in the middle of that code has changed, so it references the exact page level alternate rather than simply referencing the home page on every single page throughout the website, which we have seen in some instances. Another common mistake that we see, which is quite popular in terms of structuring and implementation, it makes it very difficult to manage from an SEO point of view. This will be setting up a website that targets, in this example, European. However, it could be any region around the world, continental or specific regions that cover multiple countries, example.com/EU or eu.example.com. Europe is not a recognized ISO region or country, so we can't target this with hreflang code. ISO is the International Standards Organization, and they basically dictate the language and country codes that are recognized globally and used by search engines. We couldn't use this for Europe because it isn't a recognized country, so we couldn't implement hreflang to that level. What we could use is hreflang EN for English or hreflang XDefault for all other, but the consideration here is it may gather non-European traffic, which we may not want to be landing on our European brand website. So this is a piece of code that I've seen numerous times attempt to be used in hreflang. This simply wouldn't be recognized. It's not valid hreflang code because EU is not a recognized country in terms of ISO codes. We could use hreflang EN. That would be fine. It would gather all of the English-speaking users, or XDefault, which would gather all users globally who aren't satisfied by the previous codes that we've specified for UK, France, Spain, and Italy. So either of those approaches would work, but take into account the fact that it may gather non-EU traffic, which may not be desirable. Another issue that we do see sometimes is missing return links. So if you reference a page from another, that page must then reference back to the original. So if we've got our home page on our GB website, we've got all our hreflang code there referencing our various European websites. If we put this code on our French website, this would be erroneous because there's no reference to the English website, whereas there is in the previous case. So we simply need to drop that extra line in there to make it valid again. The easiest way to manage this in terms of hreflang implementation is simply to use the same code on each page on which it's applicable. So for the home page, just copy that exact same 4 lines of code, apply it to every home page, and you're going to self-reference and reference every other alternative. Important thing to note, only reference when an alternate page exists. So if, for example, we had certain products that were only available on our UK website and our Spanish website, we wouldn't need to include hreflang code for France and Italy because that page doesn't exist on those websites. It's much easier to leave the code out than to reference a next best alternative or even the home page, because again, that will just cause confusion for Google and probably cause more problems than solutions. Another common error that we see is trying to specify a country but not a language. Language is a requirement of the hreflang tag. It is primarily a language tag. The country is an optional addition. So in this case, this code would not be valid because even though we're trying to target Great Britain and United States with our content, these are not recognized language codes. So Google would try to interpret these codes as languages, whereas they're not languages. These, on the other hand, are totally fine because even though they are the country code, they are the language code as well, so they would be recognized by Google. What we need to do to solve this issue is simply to add EN before the GB and EN before the US. So we're saying it's English for United Kingdom and English for the USA. That immediately makes the code valid once again. Another error that we see very often is away from hreflang, but implementing an IP redirection for all users based on their location. So an example here would be our American user attempting to access our UK content. We detect the IP address of the user and redirect them to the American content. 9 times out of 10, from a usability point of view, this would work fine. However, if you think of people who are in a foreign country for holiday or for business travel, attempting to access their home version of a piece of content, they're always going to get redirected to that local version because they're in that country. So there is the odd occasion where it would be a poor user experience. From an SEO point of view, it is really problematic. Because Google conducts all of its crawls from the US, if we attempted to land Googlebot on our UK content, we would always be redirecting it back to the US content, which means that our UK content wouldn't be crawled or indexed. Same for our Spanish, Italian, French, and so on, because Googlebot would constantly be getting redirected to the US content. Another error that we've seen more commonly in the past, less so nowadays, but does get used now and again, is dynamic serving of content based on a location. So again, detecting a cookie, IP address, login details, and changing the content based on that information. The problem here is it's typically served under one single URL. So if we have our Italian user attempting to access our American page, it changes the content based on the location that's been detected and changes it into Italian. Again, great from a usability point of view. However, you'll notice that it's only on one single URL, so there isn't a unique URL for the Italian content. Google's only going to index the English content for America because it won't be able to dynamically change the content and detect the Italian. I would say that if you have the capability or if you have the resources to translate your content, such as in this example, then certainly set up unique URLs for that content so you can gain maximum visibility in your international markets. The final sort of mistake or sort of error that I'm going to talk about here is having poor internal linking. This is particularly important if you have unique country code domains, websites that are completely separate from one another. We want to make sure that search engines are able to find all of our content on all of our websites, and also it can help to pass authority across the international sites. So as I spoke about on one of the very first slides, if you have unique country code domains, there's little sharing of that top level authority, so effectively internal linking amongst those sites can help distribute some of that link equity and really help the ranking performance of those international sites. Two brands that we spoke about at the beginning who do this particularly well in my opinion. Apple have this choose your country page that's accessible on their global site, links to all of their country websites, and Coca-Cola as well. So you select your region at the top and then it pulls up a drop-down list of all the European countries that they target. In this instance European, however there is North America, Latin America, and so on. So to summarize what we've discussed today, hreflang implementation is necessary for duplicate content for different countries, so English content that targets multiple English-speaking countries, but also translated content for different languages and different countries. Give Google as much information as possible in order for it to rank that content correctly. Try to avoid redirection or dynamic serving of content based on location, because you will severely restrict Google's crawl in this instance and limit your organic visibility internationally and potentially even in your home country as well. Make sure that your content can be found through effective internal linking, utilizing those two examples that I showed on the previous slide. They're really good sort of blueprints to go with in terms of internal linking. And finally, make sure you're using Google Search Console as much as possible. Really maximize the reports and functionality within Search Console to make sure that your geo-targeting options are as effective as possible and that you're gaining as much coverage worldwide or European-wide, however you want to target your international websites. Okay, thank you for listening today. I know we're going to be taking some questions now, so I'll hand back over to Ian.
Okay, thanks Jamie. So yeah, really deep, insightful stuff there. We do have questions coming in, so stick around. Often you learn more from the questions than the main event. Please just type in the box on the right hand side. I've got one that's come in early, and I'll just ask this one to Jamie. Could you recommend a standard best practice approach when there is firstly a global website in English and secondly multiple local sites but not all in English, some but not all in English, with some similar content. What would be a good strategy for avoiding splitting link equity between the websites? So we've got global website in English, multiple local sites, but not all in English. Just to kind of qualify this question, I mean, this is quite a deep question about how we set up our kind of domain strategy. It would be helpful if we could say who this question was from. If the person that asked that question could let us know, if we could, we'll give a generic answer, but if you could let us know if we're allowed to say who you are. So Jamie, good generic answer to that one. I think this depends on who you are.
Yeah, definitely. I think the key.
Okay. Just to interrupt, we can say it's Vodafone this. So Vodafone serve off vodafone.co.uk to UK content, vodafone.de, and also there's I think there's a global.com that seems to be let's have a look, more corporate content, so B2B type content.
Right, okay. So just, would you mind qualifying the question again, just based on that information?
Yeah. So could you recommend a standard best practice approach when there is a global website in English, and then secondly, multiple local websites, but not all in English, with some similar content? So there's some content the same, some different. Yeah. And we want to try and amalgamate the link equity.
Yeah, I would say in this instance, if you're really wanting to amalgamate the link equity, then moving on to the global domain is definitely going to be your best approach. So hosting on Vodafone.com with subfolders, that is without a doubt going to be the best way to maximize the link authority of all of those individual country-specific domains that you have set up already, because I would assume then that the vodafone.co.uk would be redirected into vodafone.com/UK. So all of that link equity would be pushed through into that main global domain, so you'd immediately start to benefit from that. I wouldn't say that that's immediately the approach to take. I would take into account the coverage that you have in each of those local markets before making a decision like this, because even though, yes, there is going to be some of the benefit of sharing that link authority of that global domain, it's not always the right approach to take. If you have a good deal of coverage in each of your local markets at the moment that you don't necessarily want to upset, then migrating all of your local websites onto one website, there are some risks coming with migration. There's no point sort of hiding that. Sometimes migrations go perfectly well and you really start to see the benefits. However, quite often they can upset things for the short term and sometimes medium term. So yeah, without sort of sitting on the fence too much, there are a lot of considerations that need to be taken into account before making such a move. However, to answer the original question of amalgamating link authority, moving on to the .com with subfolders would definitely be the way to go if that's the aim.
Okay, thank you very much. I mean, you can see how complex and consultative some of this is. So another question coming in. Can hreflang be used across different top-level domains / subdomains, or is it just for a single domain?
Yep, it can be used across any structure. So wherever your content is duplicated or translated, if it's on unique domains, subfolders or subdomains, it can be referenced no matter what the structure. Yes.
Okay, perfectly. In actual fact, it should be used. So another question, can you use hreflang XDefault and en-us referring to the exact same page?
Yes, you can use that. That would be fine. So what you would be doing in that instance is saying, okay, this page is for English speakers in America. That's fine. They go to that piece of content. What you're also saying is this page is also for any users worldwide who are not satisfied by any of the other hreflang code that we have set. So it's not uncommon to use that approach. So as I mentioned on my slide, it can be used for country selector pages, which was the example that I gave, or in this case, a catch-all page. So any piece of content that you want to catch all your other users, maybe from very uncommon, smaller countries that you may not expect to target, you can land them on your US content. That will be fine.
Okay, thank you very much. So another question, what about other location top-level domains, such as .nyc, .vegas? Do these have any location benefit?
Quite simply, no. Google has been quite vocal in saying that these won't have any kind of location benefit. However, if you think about things from a branding and click-through point of view, obviously each situation is going to have its own merits, but there may be some benefit in using a .nyc or .vegas sort of domain. But in terms of targeting, no benefit.
So no benefit, but you'd go into Search Console and target them within Search Console?
No, you wouldn't. Well, you could do that. So if you had a .nyc domain, you could go in and target it for users in the United States, but it wouldn't give you any kind of added boost within the New York region, for example.
Okay, perfect. Okay, does it have to be the country name in a subfolder, or can it be a language?
No, it doesn't have to be the country name. It could be anything. In fact, again, with some of the slides that I went through, when using the subfolder approach, Google won't immediately recognize /FR as meaning France, because you could have a category on your website that you simply have ID'd as FR, and it doesn't mean it's French, it's just a certain category. So Google won't make that assumption. So you could use FR, you could use France, you could use French, any word you want within that subfolder, and it could be a country or it could be a language. We would always recommend going with what makes sense, which would probably be FR, because it's recognizable from a user's point of view that they can probably expect that they're going to see French content. But it could be French globally, or it could be France specifically. Any approach that you wish to take can be taken.
Okay, thank you very much. Final question then. If you've asked any other questions, we will get back to you personally. I have a .co.uk and a .com. The .co.uk is 7-year established, and the .com has been going for 1 year. What should I do in the future?
It really does depend on the long-term aims of the brand, I would say, because naturally that .co.uk website, 7 years in the making, I would assume has gained a good degree of organic visibility within that local market. And to be honest, 1 year from a US, was it a US website, the other one?
Yeah, it was a .com and a .co.uk.
Yeah.
So the 7-year-old is the .co.uk.
Right. Okay. So the .com website, that's been set up for a year, so that may have already started to gain some visibility as well. So again, like one of the previous questions, it really does depend on more the long-term views of the brand, of the business. If you're wanting to really amalgamate all the link equity that you have within both of your domains, then migrating them onto the .com and perhaps using a /UK subfolder for the UK content, that's certainly an approach that can be taken. However, if I would say that amalgamating link equity shouldn't be the only view for the brand websites. There's a lot more things to take into account. Mainly the fact that the UK website is 7 years established, and whether you really want to risk upsetting that, even if it's just in the short term, by moving it onto a completely separate domain, because we have seen instances in the past of migrations that not necessarily have gone wrong, but there's been some sort of instability and some upset in the short term. So it does need to be well thought out, rather than simply looking at it from an SEO point of view. Think about it from an overall business objective point of view, and look at the visibility that's currently being gained, and whether they could risk potentially losing some of that in the short term.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'm going to close the questions now. We have got some other questions, but in the interest of time, we'll get back to you individually. So if you have posted another question, don't be disappointed. We'll get back to you. So thank you very much for attending. I just wanted to say, just to close, this is what we do day in, day out. So if there's any questions that you've got, anything further that you'd like to know, then please get in contact with us. We also do international content marketing, online PR, paid search, programmatic, social, and we've got a really strong analytics and data science team as well. So if you need any of that in other languages or indeed in English, then please get in contact with us. And just as a final closing thought, with the strength of the pound at present, now is a really good time to go abroad. We've seen lots of clients getting huge uplifts over recent weeks. So now is a really good time. If you're thinking about it, we can offer you advice on how to get started, how to localize, and how to get going in these other markets. So my contact details are on there. If you've got any further questions or there's any follow-up you'd like to give us, you'll get an email of the webinar, so you can watch it again at your leisure. All that remains for me to do is thank Jamie very, very much, and also thank you all for attending. We will be running further webinars in the future, so do look out for those. Okay, thank you very much.